Good afternoon. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from London, Canada on July 10th, 2024. And I'm happy to be joined again today by Laith Marouf. Laith is an expert in broadcasting law. He is the executive director of Free Palestine TV and a geopolitical analyst, a frequent guest on my program. Very pleased to be joined again by Laith today. Thank you, Laith, for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always a lot of fun to be on your show.
We try to make this as lighthearted as we can in times of terrible troubles. But with that as our introduction, it bears repeating something we've mentioned in the past. The world moves at lightning speed nowadays. And although our last discussion happened only 9 days ago, there's so much important news to cover today, and we'll try to get through it all. I do want to focus in the first half of our interview on a stunning new surveillance video released by the Islamic Resistance in Lebanon. But before we do that, Laith, you were in the south of the country recently with our friend and journalistic colleague, Hadi Hotait. And as I understand it, you and Hadi had a close call. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, we were visiting the Marjayun region, and we took you there. I remember when you were on the tour here in Lebanon, and where all the journalists were. And at the same time, we were watching some white phosphorus shells fall in the valley between Marjayun and Khiam. And then we decided to go to Nabatiya, but the little village on top of Nabatiya is called Nabatiya Fawqa, to inspect some locations that had been hit earlier. So as we're driving around to find the location that was targeted earlier, the Israeli drone decided to fire right beside our car in an open field. And the only thing between us and the shell that fell was a meter high half fence, cement fence that is fencing the open field. And so we stepped out and we filmed it. And as we're filming this time a Hellfire missile fell, not a white phosphorus shell. And luckily we had that wall between us and the shell. Otherwise the shrapnel could have gotten us. And since that day I wondered, was it purposeful? Clearly there was nobody else around. It was only our car in the whole part of this village, the side of the village that was driving around. There was nothing in the open field beside us that was legitimately targeted. And therefore, I was wondering, was it because our car was there, or is it they know who we are? And so I'm going right now to get my phones checked for any bugs or what have you. And I'm definitely gonna, change the phone itself, maybe even, and get a different number, because as you know, the enemy is a very vicious one and has been specifically targeting journalists. 150 somewhat Palestinian journalists have been martyred since the beginning of this genocide, and already 4 different journalists here in the south of Lebanon have been martyred. So we want to bring the reality on the ground to the audience, and we're not wearing helmets, we're not wearing body armor. So it may look sometimes, even you, when you're on this tour, it may have looked like it's a casual thing, that we're on a war front. Mm-hmm. But we're not trying to scare the audience. We are trying to humanize everything. But if the enemy wants to kill us because of this work that we're doing, there's really not much we can do to stop him from doing that.
And quite apart from the journalists killed in South Lebanon and in Gaza, as we all know, last year, the genocidal army murdered Shireen Abu Akleh, who was not only from a major media organization, Al Jazeera, but was also a uh, American citizen. And as far as we know, no one was held accountable for the atrocity. But thankfully, you're safe, and our colleague Hadi is also safe. And thank you again for taking these risks to keep our audience informed. So with that, I'd like to turn, Laith, to this extraordinary uh, surveillance video that was published 2 days ago by the Islamic Resistance in Lebanon. The first one, this is apparently a series of videos, and there's more to come. The first one was published on June 18th, and that one featured military installations and major civilian infrastructure, or dual use infrastructure, I think is more accurate to say, in and around the area of Haifa, which is the second largest city of the Zionist colony. And you and I discussed that surveillance video in a report published on my YouTube channel on June 22nd. This second surveillance video, which was published, I think, yesterday or the day before, focuses on the Golan Heights. And you and I are going to go through that in detail in a moment. I just want to clarify for our audience, what we're going to be seeing is the video as published by the Islamic Resistance, but with English subtitles. And if I understand correctly, Laith, Free Palestine TV generated the translations of those of the video itself. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. Our team translated and edited, put in the graphics for the video, so it will be accessible to as many people around the world as possible. It took a lot of time, but it was released yesterday, Beirut time, around noon, and we were able to finish with the work. It's a lot of work, especially looking for the names of the locations in Hebrew and in English to compare them to what the Arabic names of these locations are. We released it around 3 a.m. Beirut time. So it took us around 12 or 14 hours to get the work done.
And the video, the unedited video with the translations, can be found, I understand, on the X account of TV Free Palestine. Is that correct?
Yes, at TV Free Palestine on X, Twitter is where you can find it. It's pinned right now if people want to watch it.
Okay. So as I mentioned, this second video, which you posted yesterday with translations, focuses on the Golan Heights. Israel seized the Golan Heights from Syria in 1967, I believe it was, and has illegally occupied the Golan ever since. In 1981, Israel purported to annex the Golan Heights in violation of international law. The UN General Assembly and Security Council have repeatedly condemned Israel's annexation and recognized the illegality of the annexation. In fact, in 1981, shortly after Israel adopted a law that purported to annex the Golan, the United Nations Security Council unanimously, meaning with the consent of the United States government, adopted Resolution 497, which declared that Israel's annexation law was, quote, null and void and without international effect. However, when Trump was president a few years ago, he unilaterally recognized Israel's illegal annexation of the Golan. And in so doing, he did that without the approval of any international body, including the UN Security Council, and thereby flouted the will of the UN and the prior policy of the US government itself. And Biden has yet to reverse the illegal position of the Trump administration. So what we're talking about here, what we're going to see, is a surveillance video of land that doesn't even belong to Israel and has been stolen by Israel, but that is now covered with Israeli military bases, as we're going to see. And before we turn to the video, Laith, could you talk to us? I've talked about the legality of all of this. Could you talk to us about the military and economic significance of the Golan Heights for Syria, for Lebanon, and for the Zionist colony?
Yes, so the Golan Heights have much of the water sources of all the rivers that feed into Palestine, into Jordan, into the south of Syria, and into the whole south of Lebanon. So all of the major rivers have their water source coming from the Golan Heights. Of course, also it is a very important geographic location in terms of how high the mountains are in the north end of the Golan Heights. The Mount Hermon is one of the highest peaks in whole east the coast of greater Syria, let's say in Palestine, Lebanon, and so forth. So the positions that any army has on top of this Mount Hermon will be able to see, just by plain sight, by the way, you'll be able to see Damascus, you'll be able to see Amman, you'll be able to see the Jerusalem and the coastal cities of Lebanon. So it's, you could imagine that all these bases that are there, there's a host of them, around 8 of them we will see in the video, that are called the eyes of the state. And these bases of surveillance and radars and electronic warfare can see and capture everything between the Golan all the way to the mountain regions that are the borderline between Iraq and Iran, and all the way to the Taurus Mountains in Turkey, all the way to the south of Jordan. This is all surveilled from the Hermon. Now add to it the gas and oil that is in the Golan, add to it the farmlands that are there, how important they are, and you could recognize that this is one of the most valuable geographic locations in the whole region.
Okay, so with that, let's turn to the video itself, and we will go through this in some detail because it's fascinating and quite revealing. So we're going to start about 31 seconds into the video. You can see this on the screen, I take it, Laith? Just want to confirm that.
Yes, yes.
Now let's just pause there. We don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but when we analyzed the first video, you explained what hupoi is. Could you just quickly tell us again for those who didn't watch our first report?
Yes, the hoopoe is a bird that resides in Western Asia, North and East Africa, and parts of Europe. It is also considered their national, or Israel calls it the national bird. And of course, there's the story of King Solomon sending the hudhud, the hoopoe, to look for the throne of Queen Sheba if it's more valuable than his. And you know, he got the message from the hudhud. So the hudhud brings you the message of the truth, basically.
Okay. So let's continue. I just want to stop here quickly, Laith, because I think it's important for people to understand a couple of things about the lay of the land here. Up in the top of the screen, sort of to the left, where you see occupied Lebanese Shaba farms and Kafar Shuba hills, just to the left of that, there's a little peninsula, shall we say, of land of the Zionist colony jutting up. Am I correct that that is where the Metula military base is situated, and it's kind of surrounded by Lebanese territory? And you and I witnessed an attack on that base when we were at Beaufort Castle a few weeks ago. Is that right?
Yes. So
Right
actually, yes, that's where Matullah is, around there. Yes.
Okay. And up here is the Sheba Farms, which Lebanon claims is as Lebanese territory, but the Israelis again are illegally occupying it and purported to annex it. Is that correct?
No, follow the red line from the circle.
So
that is where the Sheba farms are.
I see. Okay. And this would be considered the Galilee right here. Is that correct?
This is the Hula Valley. So on the right, we have the Golan Heights, our highland.
Correct.
on the left, you have the Jabal Amil, Mount Amil on the left of the Hula Valley.
Right.
And this is in between these two mountains and a lowland that is flat. And when we would be standing in Beaufort, which is at the top corner of the Hula Valley, on the top, yes, here, around here is where the Beaufort Crusader Castle is, and we would be looking to the Hula Valley, but it would be hidden behind the hills, so we wouldn't be able to see it. So the Hula Valley is a lowland where the water comes down from the Golan Heights, and then you have a little Hula Lake that has a river that takes you down to Tabariya Lake or the Sea of Galilee. That's the importance of the Hula Valley. It's where all the water collects.
Right. And Damascus would be in the upper right-hand corner, in the general vicinity of the upper right-hand corner of our screen. Is that right?
Yes, exactly where you had the cursor.
And am I correct that Damascus is visible from the northern Golan Heights?
Yes, definitely it is fully visible, you know, with just your eyes, you can see Damascus from there. So you could imagine with a high surveillance equipment what would be happening.
So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why Israel refuses to give up this land to which it has no right. It is clearly of strategic importance. I think, would you agree with that, Laith?
Yes, definitely it is one of the most important pieces of property in the whole region.
And Mount Hermon, I believe, is in the Golan and is the highest peak in the region. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if you look at that circle for the Shabaa farms, occupied Lebanese Shabaa, that the circle, right in the middle of that circle would be Mount Hermon.
Up here where
In the circle, yeah, the actual red circle.
the bigger one.
Right. Yes, right
Mount
there would be the Mount Hermon right at the top of it. And you see part of it is on the Lebanese side, part of the side of it, and part of it is on in the occupied Syrian territory.
Let's continue. I just want to pause here just to give people an opportunity, because this is quite an impressive list of strategic electronic surveillance bases. And you'll see further down the list, it says units 8,200 and 9,900 are positioned there. What are those units, Laith?
Okay, so by the way, you can drag maybe the thing that shows the play and so on away, so we can see the words. Okay, here, perfect. So these units are very important units that are attack and main defense units that are facing the Syrian military positions. And so these are the most hardened and ready forces for the major threat. The loss of the Golan would mean loss of all of what's under the Golan, including the Hula Valley and others. But I want to note, you see how these are called the eyes of the state, the last thing that it says there. Why? Because they are positioned on such high positions and they're looking all the way across the whole West Asia plains.
Right.
In the last few days, Hezbollah specifically targeted the Israel site at the top. You see around on Mount Hermon itself, they have 4 bases. Okay, and they right now Hezbollah completely destroyed the lowest one, the Israel site. Just in the last 72 hours, we saw huge drone waves attack that site.
And just one other thing before we move on, I hadn't pointed this out previously, but this area here to the right, or it would be the, I guess, the east of the red highlighted section of the Golan, this is a demilitarized zone. Is that correct? This is Syrian
Yes, and
territory and it's demilitarized.
Yes, it is. There is a UN force very similar to the UNIFIL in the south of Lebanon that is patrolling that area.
Yeah, that would be the entire length of this area here.
Yes, and this is all officially still with Syria, and as a Syrian citizen, I can enter it, but it's a zone that the Syrian military cannot enter.
Okay, let's continue. Now, I just want to pause there and make two observations, Laith. The first is this is an amazing level of detail. It looks, I mean, you can actually see the shades of the buildings as this drone is flying overhead. Do you take that to mean that this drone was flying very low, or that it has very sophisticated video capabilities, or both?
I think it definitely has very high sophisticated camera. And I would want to note another thing is that we saw it said first survey and then second survey, right? And
Yeah.
if you looked, clearly one of them was in the fall, the other is in the winter. And we will see later on in the videos, others saying third survey that looks like we're in the spring,
Right.
summer.
And
So
the reason why I paused here is because that looks like snow that we see on the screen. So this would have been the winter survey, the second survey.
exactly.
Right. Let's say, go ahead. I interrupted you.
Yes, and we are looking right now at those 8 main sites, and they're going through them. These are the most sensitive sites. Without them, if the Israelis call them the eyes of the state, without them, they're blind. They wouldn't know what's coming to hit them in the whole region. They can't even see those Iranian drones that were coming when Iran retaliated for the attacks on its embassy in Damascus. They wouldn't have been able to see them without these sites at the top of the Golan.
And let's recall that Israel borders on 4 states. Jordan and Egypt are effectively run by puppets of the United States government. So the 2 states that they are primarily concerned with are Syria and Lebanon. And that's where the eyes of the state logically have been situated, correct?
Yes. Yes, said before targeting, because that was one of the sites that Hezbollah targeted in the last week. So they purposefully put before targeting, meaning they have probably footage after the targeting. They're teasing the Israelis right there.
And according to a Telegram channel of the resistance, I noted today that they reported that the Israeli military itself is quite I'm sorry, not the Israeli military, the Israeli media is pointedly drawing attention to the fact that sites that appeared in this surveillance video have been attacked in the last few days, which is obviously causing some consternation.
Yeah, you reminded me of something. Remember the last time when Hezbollah released the first Hoppo video, the Israeli government and military claimed that they actually spotted the drones and that they didn't shoot them down because didn't want to scare the populace of Haifa. Well, the Golan Heights, all of it, has no regular colonists. The Golan Heights, all the colonies there are populated with the families of the military staff only. So what's the excuse of not shooting these drones with first survey, second, third survey, and third survey? Why didn't you shoot them down? They don't want to even address that, neither in the Israeli media or the Israeli military itself. They're just ignoring that reality that they said this for the Haifa, and they are not discussing it today.
Yes, and let's just, I think point out what should be obvious to everybody by now, and that is this myth of the impenetrable Israeli air defenses has been completely exploded at this stage. And as we're going to see further on in this video, it's almost gotten to the point where the Islamic Resistance is mocking the claim that Israel's air defenses are impenetrable. So let's move on here. What did you understand that to be? Entrance to the tunnel. Do you have an understanding of what that tunnel is all about?
So there is definitely what we see as the bases above ground, and then there is all the infrastructure under. Clearly, the Israelis must have built fortified cement bases under for the command and control and to protect their soldiers and so on. So Hezbollah, in this whole video, they show you only one entrance. Okay, but they clearly know now, if they had surveyed these sites so many times, they would know every entrance to the underground parts of these bases. And if you bomb these entrances, you're burying these soldiers underground alive, basically. So it's telling the Israelis that it doesn't matter, even if you go hide underground, we will get you.
Right. So again, I just want to point out, Laith, that, I mean, you can see this is amazing. I mean, you can see the shadow of that antenna. It almost looks like the drone is hovering. I don't know. I'm just guessing here. I'm ballparking it, but 100 meters or 200 meters above the top of that antenna.
Yes.
So either it's flying very low or it has very powerful lenses, or both. Any thoughts about that?
Yes, I mean, a few days ago, people were asking, I was just talking to different people in a setting, and people were wondering if Hezbollah's suicide drones and so on can have the ability to go up and hit sites so high up, and the oxygen level and so on. And people were just talking, military. And clear, we already now have the answer with this video, that they can reach the highest points of the Golan. And we also have now the answer with the attacks on the sites in the Golan in the last 24, 48 hours. So no, they have very advanced drones, and they're definitely teasing everybody with these images, and they clearly are not giving us the full 4K. They're giving us just HD hint of what they can have. And with 4K or higher, you can zoom in to see every little detail on the ground there.
So I just want to stop there. We just saw on the western side of the Golan the identification of a whole series of military bases and barracks. Would this be publicly available information that they're situated there and the names of them and so forth? Or we talked about this when we saw the first Hopoi video that there are reasons to believe that the Islamic Resistance has on the ground intelligence to supplement its surveillance, or maybe they're deriving this information from open sources. What are your thoughts about that, Laith?
So clearly some of these spaces, at least the major ones, are the information is out there, including probably on Israeli military sites and or even probably Wikipedia. But what we will notice here is that there's more than just these regular bases that everybody knows about. There's much more, including new positions that have been, as we will see and go on, been built since the beginning of this war. In terms of the intelligence, when you're talking about intelligence gathering, I'm sorry, I just remembered that you asked for about that. The Golan Heights, as an occupied territory, the Israelis expelled, 3/4 of the Syrian population in 1967. And all of them ended up in the southern regions around Damascus. And there's a huge neighborhood in Damascus that is mainly refugees from the Golan Heights. And the Syrians that remained inside the Golan Heights refused to have the Israeli citizenship imposed on them. Okay. And they were hoarded into two main villages. One of them, Ain Shams in the north is the largest one, and they were not allowed to return to their towns and villages in the Golan, and those were all turned into these military colonies. And one last note about the Syrians in the Golan: they're nationalist. They love Syria. They demonstrate every year. They come out at the Liberation Day of Syria at the end of the French colonial era, and they are considered a huge threat. The Israelis consider them a huge threat. There's very big names of their resistance there. So yeah, clearly the Syrians in the Golan Heights would be providing information to the resistance as a whole.
Okay.
Yeah, that Habushit site was hit in the last 48 hours.
This is, I'm sorry, the site we just saw. So let me just
Yeah, Habushit.
right there. This was struck within the last 48 hours.
Yes, and it says before targeting. You see that on the top?
Right. Right.
Okay. So
Wow.
they had hit this site, and they're teasing the Israelis that they probably have images of after the fact.
And again, not to harp on this point, but I mean, I can actually count the number of cars that are parked there. They're that distinguishable in terms of the quality of the video, which is quite something. Again, no one, I think, would have anticipated, no layperson in the West would have anticipated that the Islamic Resistance had this capability, this surveillance capability available to it prior to the current round of hostilities.
See, it says new enemy locations.
What does that mean,
Out.
though? New
Okay,
enemy?
so these are sites that the Israeli military moved its troops out of the bases since the beginning of the Aqsa flood, since October, so they wouldn't be hit in the major bases. So the surveillance that Hezbollah did covers now all the temporary and new locations that were built since the beginning of the war. So they have updated their intelligence of the assets on the ground and the targets that they could be targeting.
Okay. Now, just in the interest of time, Laith, I think this has given us a very good sense of what this video reveals. I want to fast forward because there's a lot of ground I want to cover with you. I want to fast forward to the very end of this video where something quite intriguing happens. But before I do that, is there any other thing you want to comment upon in terms of the military sites that the balance of this video shows? I want to go to the, the urban areas that appear at the very end. Any other thing you want to tell us about the military sites that this video surveys?
Yes, so you will see there, of course, many of these newly built sites. You will also even see that Hezbollah has surveyed the new off-road paths that the Israeli military has created to move the troops between these temporary bases. You will also see identification of all these different headquarters and command centers and so on. And the multitude of air defense systems and their control, offices or whatever, structures. So they're telling the Israelis in this video that they have full detail, and when the time comes in a full-out war, these bases are out of commission, and they're already coming out of commission with all the attacks over the last week.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the end of this fascinating video. And I want to share with our audience the last 30 seconds or so. Let's just go back a little bit here. If people see in the upper left-hand corner, it says in the next episode. And the last thing I want to point out is this is coastline. So let's just go to the end. Now, I did a little geographical calculation in my head, Laith. This is what I came up with. It looks like a coastal city. It looks like a major urban area. Doesn't look like a little village fishing village on the coast. And they've already shown us Haifa. So that doesn't leave a lot of options. I mean, we're speculating. Who knows? We'll find out eventually. I suspect the Israelis already know what city that is. But I'm guessing it's either Tel Aviv or maybe something further south. What is it that the name of the major port between
Ashdod.
and Gaza, Ashdod?
Yeah.
What's your guess as to what city that is?
I think I will take some time to look for it because I didn't have enough time as we were doing all this editing. But you could see in the first shot, it was Safad, just near the Galilee, so the main city there. And you could see in between Safad and the coastline, a few shots from different cities there. And then finally, we're on the coast, but we don't know. It could be one of the major cities between Haifa and Tel Aviv, major population centers that are there, but not Tel Aviv or more south. I don't know. It could be because I could see them, building things in stages.
Right.
And they want to release number 3, and they probably want to release number 4.
Well,
They're doing so good with this propaganda. They're doing great.
Maybe maybe it's not within their capabilities to get as far as Tel Aviv or even further south than that. But I would
Definitely, it's not in their capabilities. It is in their capabilities, and they probably filmed everything in Palestine over the last 9 months and before that. Remember 2 years ago when there was the negotiations about the gas fields between the maritime waters of Lebanon and Palestine. Hezbollah sent drones over the gas fields of Israel all the way almost at Haifa, sorry, at Gaza, just north of Gaza. And they purposefully made those drones visible to the Israeli capabilities as they were approaching the gas fields. They actually switched mechanisms in them to make them visible. Okay. And that's, was a threat. And that's why we ended up having the Americans give Lebanon everything that it is owed in terms of the water borders. So yeah, they have the capabilities to film all the way to Gaza if they want to.
Now, as you know, the Israelis have been absorbing this newest alarming, must be from their perspective, alarming surveillance video. Two devastating reports came out on what happened on October 7th and what has transpired in Gaza since then. The report about what happened on October 7th was published by Haaretz. You know, I would hazard a guess that it is the most liberal, major media organization in the Zionist colony today, although that's not saying much. And it concerns something called the Hannibal Directive. And the Hannibal Directive, as I understand it, is simply just an inhumane, rather criminal directive that the Israeli military has employed from time to time, that its adversaries should never be permitted to acquire hostages. And so extreme is the determination of the genocidal army to prevent its adversaries from getting their hands on Israeli hostages that they kill them. They would rather kill them, or at least risk killing them, than having them end up in the hands of the adversaries and becoming bargaining chips for the release of the far greater number of hostages in the custody and in the dungeons of the Zionist colony. So I'm going to quote a few paragraphs at some length from this Haaretz article, which was published, I believe it was on July 7th, so a few days ago. And it says as follows: Gaza division operations and airstrikes in the first hours of October 7th were based on limited information. The first long moments after the Hamas attack was launched were chaotic. Reports were coming in with their significance not always clear. When the meaning was understood, it was realized that something horrific had taken place. Communication networks could not keep up with the flow of information, as was the case for soldiers sending these reports. However, the message conveyed at 11:22 a.m., so this would have been on October 7th, across the Gaza division network was understood by everyone. Quote, "Not a single vehicle can return to Gaza," was the order. Documents obtained by Haaretz, as well as testimonies of soldiers, mid-level, and senior IDF officers, reveal a host of orders and procedures laid down by the Gaza Division, Southern Command, and the IDF General Staff up to the afternoon hours of that day, showing how widespread the procedure was from the first hours following the attack and at various points along the border. The procedure, of course, I'm just interjecting here, is the Hannibal principle, which is kill everything and anything in order to prevent the adversary, here the Palestinian militants returning to Gaza, from doing so with Israeli hostages in their custody. And the article goes on, Haaretz does not know whether or how many civilians and soldiers were hit due to these procedures, but the cumulative data indicates that many of the kidnapped people were at risk, exposed to Israeli gunfire, even if they were not the target. A very senior IDF source confirmed to Haaretz that Hannibal procedure was employed on October 7th, adding that this was not used by the divisional commander, who did give the order. This, said the source, will perhaps be established by post-war investigations. And finally, and I'm quoting, everyone was shocked by the number of terrorists who had penetrated the base. Even in our nightmares, we didn't have plans for such an attack. No one had a clue about the number of people kidnapped or where army forces were. There was crazy hysteria with decisions made without any verified information, the source continued. So I'm done quoting from this article. You can find it in full on the Haaretz website, assuming you can get beyond the paywall. Now, Laith, I've seen no reporting on this in the Western mainstream media. And in fact, when asked about the Hannibal directive by Sam Husseini, whom I interviewed recently, he's a journalist based in Washington, the US State Department's main spokesperson, Miller, claimed never to have heard of it. And I'm going to play that bit of exchange right now so people can see the rather remarkable statement by the spokesperson of the US State Department.
Talk about the hostages. Israel has a Hannibal directive in which it has orders in place to kill at least its own soldiers, lest they fall into the hands of Palestinian groups. And there's substantial reporting that in fact, was utilized on October 7th, not just against Israeli soldiers, but against civilians. Are we not now in a situation where Israel may be using the Hannibal directive, not just on Israelis, civilians and military, but on U.S. citizens and other foreign nationals?
So I am not familiar in any way with either that supposed directive or those reports. And so
you've never heard of the Hannibal?
Certainly would not want to comment on it.
You've never heard of the Hannibal directive?
Now, Laith, what do you make all of this? What conclusions can we draw, if any, about what actually happened on October 7th? And what's your overall read of what is going on here? Why is this coming out now?
Yes, so let's think about what happened October 7th. The Palestinian resistance groups wanted to capture as many prisoners of war, I don't like the word hostages, in order to exchange them with the multitude, as you mentioned, of Palestinian prisoners of war. And clearly, when we understand that, the Palestinian resistance has no interest in having any dead bodies on its hand. It needs alive prisoners of war, because it wants to exchange them for living prisoners of war. Although the Israelis actually hold the bodies of hundreds of Palestinians that have been imprisoned since 1948, and it still refuses to release their bodies to their families. By the way, see, this is the real, even Palestinian bodies after death are hostages in Israel. To get back to that, so there's all the videos that Hamas released that day, and they were all filmed from GoPros and whatever, that we saw of Hamas fighters going into homes in the colonies that fell under their control with the collapse of the 11 Israeli bases that were attacked that day, and filming themselves, talking to the women and the children, telling them that the Quran says we're not allowed to harm you, and so forth. These videos are still out online. You can watch them from those days, and that's what happened. The only civilians that ended up being inside Gaza were in the moment of chaos after the breach of the apartheid wall to the concentration camp. There was thousands of Palestinians that attacked, walked out and felt the need to do vengeance and so on. And luckily, a lot of these civilians that were caught by Palestinian civilians instead of Palestinian fighters were rounded and, taken away by Hamas once they reached Gaza. That's why, we saw all those civilians from the rave on the borders of the death camp that ended up being released in the first wave of exchanges. Okay, so one last thing to say about October 7th. I would venture to say that the vast majority of non-combatants, I wouldn't call them civilians, the colonists, vast majority of colonists that were killed on that day were killed by Israeli fire in this Hannibal directive, and or in the exchanges of fire between the Palestinian resistance and the Israelis and the civilians that were stuck in between that. It was little interest that Hamas had to have any dead Israelis on its hands.
And I just want to add, Laith, because I quoted some of the language from this article, which was exculpatory, a word that we lawyers use. In other words, it seemed designed to mitigate, if not excuse altogether, the culpability of the Israeli military in the murder of its own soldiers and the murder of its own civilians or non-combatants, as you described them. So, for example, when they talk about the chaos, and there's one paragraph in there in the Haaretz article when it talks about how these commanders are going to have to live with this for the rest of their lives, that they did this. And I also found rather striking this claim that they never imagined that something like this could happen, even though in the weeks leading up to the October 7th attacks, there were a number of intelligence reports, and reportedly even the Egyptian forces or military were warning the Israelis that something like this might happen. So all of this just seems to me to be conditioning the Israeli population for, and the Western audience in particular, the ones who are supplying the murderous weapons to the Zionist colony, for the damning revelations to come. They're getting us ready. I mean, I can't believe that very senior sources in the Israeli military, which is how Haaretz described them, decided to go to Haaretz and disclose all of this in advance of the completion of the investigation without having some ulterior motive. These people are no saints. And I think we're being prepared for some devastating revelations, which, of course, the Western media are going to do their best to ignore, and are doing their best to ignore. I haven't seen any major Western media organization cover the Haaretz revelations. Have you?
No, not at all, actually. And, remember that these revelations have been told to us from day one of October 7th by Palestinian sources and information, and even evidence for everybody to see with their own eyes without even an investigation. You saw the damage done to these houses in these colonies and the cars at the rave outside the extermination camp. And so finally now, why Haaretz is doing this? Because it's damage control. As you said, it had to make it, massage it to look like, that's, it's the same way that they say, Palestinians make them kill their children. If only Palestinians wouldn't make us kill their children. The same concept. They're trying to massage the reality because it's now everybody knows it. It's been proven by many independent journalists beyond the Palestinians in the West. There's been others that carried the wars of Palestinian journalists and repeated them. As the other revelations that we will talk about later on in this show, things are piling up. And we've been conditioned enough after seeing 9 months of one video after another of a Palestinian child blown up to genocide, and specifically of the Palestinian people, that something like this can be published by Haaretz and it just, pours over your back like water, and it's nothing.
Right. So let's turn to the second major damning revelations coming from 927 magazine. And by the way, I'm going to provide a link in the description to the YouTube video to the Haaretz article and to the 927 magazine article. But this article effectively confirmed what many of us have already come to conclude about the total absence of any kind of restraint on the Israeli military in terms of the use of lethal fire in Gaza. And let's recall that within days of the October 7th attacks, Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, who has now finally become the subject of a an arrest warrant application by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. He said he was lifting all restraints on the Israeli military. He told the whole world days before this genocidal assault began on Gaza that there would be no restraints on the Israeli military. And in fact, he said no one's going to be tried by any military tribunals at all, no matter what they do. So here's what 972 magazine had to say. In early June, Al Jazeera aired a series of disturbing videos revealing what it described as summary executions. Israeli soldiers shooting dead several Palestinians walking near the coastal road in the Gaza Strip. And in each case, the Palestinians appeared unarmed and did not pose any imminent threat to the soldiers. 972 magazine now reports that these executions, which did not appear to have any security rationale, are consistent with the testimonies of 6 Israeli soldiers who spoke to the magazine following their release from active duty in Gaza in recent months. Corroborating the testimonies of Palestinian eyewitnesses and doctors throughout the war, the soldiers described being authorized to open fire on Palestinians virtually at will, including civilians. And I just want to quote 2 more horrifying paragraphs from this article. The soldiers testified that throughout Gaza, corpses of Palestinians in civilian clothes remained scattered along roads and open ground. The whole area was full of bodies, said S., a reservist. There are also dogs, cows, and horses that survived the bombings and have nowhere to go. We can't feed them, and we don't want them to get too close either, so you occasionally see dogs walking around with rotting body parts. There is a horrific smell of death. And lastly, again, I'm quoting, before you leave, you burn down the house, every house. B, another reservist reiterated, quote, this is backed up at the battalion commander level. It's so that Palestinians won't be able to return. And if we left behind any ammunition or food, the terrorists won't be able to use it. Close quote. A couple of observations here, Laith. Throughout this article, these reservists, while recounting this Nazi-like behavior, refer to the Palestinians as terrorists, the militants. They seem to be living in some alternate reality where even though at a certain level their conscience is bothered possibly by the horrors that they and their brothers in arms inflicted upon the civilian population of Gaza, they still regard the militants defending Gaza as terrorists, but never suggest that they themselves are the terrorists. I just have to, make that observation. But the second thing, again, I have not seen any mainstream reporting on these revelations in the Western media. Have you seen any? And what do you make of this report?
Yeah, again, this is a report that confirms what the Palestinian journalists have been telling us on the ground for 9 months. Day in, day out, these journalists told us that civilians are being shot as they're carrying white flags, as they're being told to go from one place to another. So it's, I think the major article that probably prompted all these mea culpas and attempts at massaging the truth is that of the Lancet. And the Lancet, for any of the viewers that don't know, is the premier medical journal in the world. And it said 186,000 Palestinians at minimum have been killed, martyred since the beginning of this war, that this number could be actually close to 500,000. Remember, even if we say 250,000 are dead, that's 10% of the population. Add to it the, at least another 500,000, if not 700,000 that are injured. So you're talking about half of the population that is dead or injured since the beginning of this war. And that doesn't happen by just bombs falling. That happens by a systematic policy of targeting civilians anytime you can. Okay. And we've been having monstrous, depraved American, Canadian, European, Jewish Zionist going down on planes and filming themselves, murder Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank for months now. It is now, if you are a serial killer, you can just go and kill any Palestinian child you want. We're not even talking about the missing children. This is very painful. You know, there's at least 20,000 Palestinian children missing. We're not talking about the ones buried under the ground, under the rubble. What is happening to these Palestinian children? Are they being kidnapped by the Israeli forces? We've already watched a few reports like this during the first months of the war. Where are they going? Are they being trafficked? This is beyond the depravity of and the monstrosity of the Zionist soldiers and not soldiers, is beyond even what this 972 report is telling us, beyond what the Lancet could even imagine. We're already at a count that is horrendous, and I don't see an end to it anytime soon. I see this only continuing at even a faster pace as less and less reporting is happening and more normalization of these images of the Holocaust in Gaza become imprinted in our collective mind.
Sadly, I must agree with you, Laith. You know, I was, as you know, from the time of the October 7th attacks up until mid-June, I was in West Asia, including Palestine and South Lebanon with you, and in other parts of the Eastern Mediterranean for all but 6 weeks of the genocide. Those 6 weeks were in December and January. And when I was in Canada in December and January, I also went down to Washington, D.C. during that time for a major protest at the White House. There were routinely thousands and thousands of people coming out to these protests. I'm saddened, but not particularly surprised to see, since I came back to Canada for the first time a couple of weeks ago, that the protests now are much smaller. And the media coverage is, with all of the flaws and limitations it had back then, the media coverage in the West has become even more impoverished, even more indifferent. So, for example, we've talked about these two huge revelations about the Hannibal directive and the open fire environment in Gaza. No one in the Western mainstream media seems remotely interested in talking about these things. And so, again, I see nothing to suggest that Western government policy towards Israel is going to change because of some sudden, sense of culpability or responsibility, or, they grow a conscience. It seems that ultimately this is going to be resolved by military means, which means that there will be vastly more suffering, and that this could escalate into something, approximating our worst nightmares. In any event, I'd like to try to close this on a somewhat lighter note, although it's not a particularly light note, because at the end of the day, we're talking about a mental incompetent being the president of the United States during all of this. But you and I had a debate during our last, I don't know if it's right to call it a debate, but we talked about what is really going on with the attempts by the liberal media and powerful factions within the Democratic Party to get rid of Joe Biden. And you and I agreed, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understood your position, we agreed that this whole thing was being orchestrated. They moved up the debate. Then immediately following the predictably catastrophic performance of Genocide Joe, who I like to refer to as the psycho zombie, they, immediately were calling for him to be removed from the presidential race. And you and I agreed that they were going to, in fact, remove him. Where we parted company was on the question of why this was all happening. And you, as I understood your position, you believe that they wanted Trump to win because he was a more blunt instrument, and they are of the view that at this point in time, they really need a blunt instrument to sort of finish
Yes.
the job, the diabolical job in Ukraine and the diabolical, even more diabolical job that they have taken up in Palestine and West Asia. I was of the view that they actually wanted to defeat Trump, and that the reason why they are turning on Biden is because they realize that they're very unlikely to do that with Biden. Biden has so much baggage. I mean, after all, he's come to be known as Genocide Joe, and you know he's just now so obviously incompetent mentally that they can't beat Trump, and they do want to beat Trump. So that's my theory. And I've thought about this some more. A couple of things happened today. So I was at the gym today and I was doing my little daily workout on the treadmill, and they had all the televisions in front of me, and there's CNN, and they're going back and forth from, you know, the Alec Baldwin trial and the NATO summit. But at the bottom of the screen, the whole time I'm on the treadmill running, they've got George Clooney calls for Joe Biden to step down. And so George Clooney, in fact, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times calling for Joe Biden to step down. So there's no indication that despite Biden's evident determination to remain in the race, that the powers that be within the Democratic Party are going to give up on this. They want him out. At least ostensibly, they want him out. So as I'm standing there running, I thought to myself, there's one part of your theory that it seems to me to be a logical inconsistency, and that is if they want to lose, if they want Trump to become the president, why don't they just leave the psycho zombie in the race? So,
But this is what I was gonna say. Like I have been actually surprised over the last week how all the leading Democratic representatives are actually saying no, Joe should stay, including the fake progressive squad. Ilhan Omar steps up today in front of the media with her AOC and Kerry Bush saying that this is the best president in her lifetime, that Biden has her support. And you're like, what is happening? So I am actually even more shocked that they want him to stay. Maybe like these voices like Clooney and others that are outside the party. We have not yet heard one major party operative within the Democratic Party saying Joe should go. Right?
Actually, there's this fellow named Andrew Smith. Not too many people know who this character is, but apparently,
so he's a sideshow kid. Okay, he's a sidekick. He's a backbencher. I said any major. Okay.
No, I believe he's on a committee. He's on I think it's the Armed Services Intelligence Committee, something like that. The media is presenting him as, although he's not well known to the American public, as a very influential voice in the Democratic Party. So, but yes, in general, there are notable figures in the Democratic Party who are standing behind Genocide Joe. But it does seem as though the major donors of the party, the major liberal media organizations, CNN, the New York Times, MSNBC, are trying very hard to push him out. In any event, we will.
But this is where I'm saying this is, I think, part of the show, right? If they wanted to win, they would have, let's say, taken him out and put somebody immediately. But now they're doing this whole fight, and they're actually weakening the position of the party in not only in Biden himself, even their own seats in the Congress and Senate now are getting put into question with this behavior.
Well, if nothing else, this is fascinating and in a morbid, sick sort of way, entertaining. We'll continue to follow this story. Laith, as always, it is a pleasure talking to you. Please stay safe out there, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Talk to you soon, Dimitri.
And this is Dimitri Lascaris reporting from London, Canada on July 10th, 2024.